Every town has its ghost stories. Every neighborhood has that one house that kids dare each other to approach. But Millbrook, Massachusetts had something different. Something that defied explanation, even by the standards of New England's long and dark history. The Blackwood house only existed on Halloween night. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I do. But before you click away, before you dismiss this as another creepypasta or urban legend, let me ask you something. Have you ever driven down a familiar street and sworn something was different? Have you ever had that unsettling feeling that a house you've never seen before has somehow always been there? If you have, keep listening. And if you're watching this from somewhere else in the world, drop a comment below and let me know if your town has a legend like this. Hit that subscribe button because this story goes places you won't expect. My name is Sarah Chen and I'm a paranormal investigator. Well, that's what my YouTube channel says. The truth is messier. I'm a former journalist who lost her job when the newspaper folded, and I pivoted to digital content because, well, rent doesn't pay itself. I started out skeptical, a career journalist trained to question everything, but 3 years of investigating. Supposedly haunted locations had shown me things I couldn't explain, but nothing prepared me for the Blackwood house. I first heard about it in a comment on one of my videos. User Millbrook Mike 1987 wrote, "You want a real story? Come to Millbrook, Mass on Halloween. The house on Thornhill Lane, but you won't come back. I get threats and challenges all the time. Internet bravado is cheap, and most of these so-called real hauntings turn out to be creaky pipes and overactive imaginations." But something about this comment stuck with me. Maybe it was the specificity. Maybe it was the fact that when I looked up Millbrook, Massachusetts, I found a quiet town of about 8,000 people. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and secrets don't stay secret for long. I did what I always do, research. 'Cause that's where things got weird. There was almost nothing online about any Blackwood house. No historical records, no property deeds, no news stories. For a supposedly notorious haunted house, it had a remarkably light digital footprint. What I did find were scattered references in local Facebook groups, quickly deleted. A Reddit thread from 3 years ago that had been removed by moderators, a blog post from 2012 that led to a 404 error. Someone was scrubbing information about this place. That's when I knew I had to go. I reached out to my usual crew. Marcus, my cameraman and childhood friend who'd saved me from more than one dangerous situation. Eleanor, a psychic medium whose abilities I'd gone from doubting to reluctantly respecting. And Jake, my tech guy who monitored our equipment and kept us grounded when things got too weird. A house that only exists on Halloween, Marcus said when I pitched the idea over coffee at our usual spot in Brooklyn. Sarah, that's literally impossible. So were the shadow figures we captured at the Danvers Asylum, I reminded him. So was the EVP recording from the Hillside Cemetery that spoke your name. He shifted uncomfortably. We didn't talk about Hillside Cemetery. This feels different, Eleanor said quietly. She'd been staring into her tea the whole conversation, that faraway look in her eyes that meant she was sensing something. There's something about this place, something that doesn't want to be found. All the more reason to investigate, I said. Jake was the only one who seemed excited. Dude, if we capture evidence of a house that literally materializes once a year, we're talking career-making content, Joe Rogan-level stuff. I'd be lying if I said the thought of viral success didn't appeal to me. My channel had a decent following, about 200,000 subscribers, but I was still struggling to make ends meet. One breakthrough video could change everything. But that wasn't really why I wanted to go. The truth was I needed to know. Once you've seen real evidence of the paranormal, once you've witnessed things that science can't explain, you can't just go back to normal life. It changes you. You start seeing the cracks in reality, the places where the impossible bleeds through, and you need to understand why. We made plans to drive up to Millbrook on October 30th, giving ourselves time to scout the location and interview locals before Halloween night. I posted about the upcoming investigation on my channel, and the response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments, most of them warning us not to go. My cousin went to that house in 2003. One comment read, "He was never the same." Don't do this. Another, "I grew up in Millbrook. We don't talk about Thornhill Lane. Please, for your own safety, stay away." And dozens of variations on the same theme. "No one comes back. You'll regret this." The house takes something from everyone who enters. The comments should have scared me off. But they had the opposite effect. This wasn't just local legend, this was collective trauma. Something had happened in Millbrook, something the whole town was desperate to forget. We left Brooklyn early on October 30th, driving through the autumn landscape of Connecticut and Massachusetts. The leaves were at peak color, brilliant reds and golds that seemed almost artificial in their vibrancy. It was the kind of perfect New England fall day that makes you understand why people write poems about this place. But as we got closer to Millbrook, the landscape changed. The colors seemed to fade, as if we were driving through an old photograph that had been left in the sun too long. The clouds thickened, and a fog rolled in that had no business being there on a clear autumn afternoon. Anyone else feeling this? Elena asked from the back seat. She had her eyes closed, her hands pressed against her temples. Feeling what? Marcus asked, but I knew what she meant. There was a weight in the air, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. It was like driving into the eye of a storm. That electric anticipation before something breaks. We arrived in Millbrook around 2 p.m. The town was exactly what I'd expected. A small New England village with a white church, a main street lined with brick buildings, and the kind of wholesome small-town atmosphere that felt pulled from a Norman Rockwell painting. But there was something off about it, something I couldn't quite place. Then I realized there were no Halloween decorations. It was October 30th, the day before Halloween. Every house should have been decked out with pumpkins, skeletons, fake cobwebs. Kids should have been running around in costume. But Millbrook looked like Halloween didn't exist. No decorations, no jack-o'-lanterns, nothing. That's weird, right? Jake said, noticing the same thing. I mean, New England towns go hard for Halloween. We checked into the Millbrook Inn, a small bed and breakfast run by a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Patterson. She was friendly enough when we arrived, asking about our stay and recommending local restaurants. But when I mentioned we were here to investigate local history, her smile faltered. What kind of history? She asked carefully. Haunted history, I said, watching her reaction. We're paranormal investigators. We've heard stories about Millbrook. Her face went pale. There's nothing here for you, she said flatly. Maybe you should try Salem. Lots of tourists go to Salem. We're specifically interested in Thornhill Lane, I pressed. The Blackwood House. Mrs. Patterson actually stepped back like I'd physically pushed her. There is no Blackwood House, she said, her voice shaking. And you need to leave Thornhill Lane alone. You hear me? Don't go there. Not tomorrow night. Not ever. Why? I asked. What happens there? But she wouldn't say anything else. She practically ran back to her office, leaving us standing in the foyer with our luggage. Well, that was ominous, Marcus muttered. We spent the rest of the afternoon trying to talk to locals. We visited the library, the historical society, the coffee shop on Main Street. Everyone had the same reaction, fear followed by denial, followed by warnings to leave town. The librarian, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 25, actually started crying when I mentioned the Blackwood House. Please, she whispered, looking around to make sure no one heard her. Please just go home. Don't make me remember. Remember what? I asked gently. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I can't. They told me not to talk about it. They said if we don't talk about it, if we don't think about it, maybe it won't come back. What won't come back? But she just ran into the back office, leaving me with more questions than answers. By evening, we'd learned virtually nothing concrete. No one would talk. No one would explain. But the fear was real and it was universal. Whatever had happened in Millbrook, whatever the Blackwood House was, it had traumatized an entire town. We found Thornhill Lane just before sunset. It was on the outskirts of town, a winding road that led up into the hills. The houses along the street were old, Victorian era mostly, and well maintained. But there was a gap in the numbers. The addresses went from 1428 to 1432, with nothing in between. That's where it appears, Elena said softly. She was staring at the empty lot between the houses. To me, it just looked like an overgrown yard, full of weeds and dead trees. But Elena saw something else. There's a residual energy here, like an echo. Something violent happened here. Something that left a mark. Can you be more specific? Jake asked, already setting up equipment to monitor electromagnetic fields and temperature fluctuations. Elena walked toward the empty lot, then stopped abruptly at what must have been the property line. "I can't go further," she said. "There's a barrier. It's not there yet, but it's waiting. It knows we're here." "It?" Marcus asked. "The house?" "No," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. "Something older than the house. Something that uses the house." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Uses it for what?" Elena turned to look at me, and her eyes were wide with fear. "To feed." We spent that night at the inn, though none of us slept much. I kept thinking about what Elena had said. Something that uses the house to feed. Feed on what? The people who entered? Their fear? Their souls? At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and started going through my research again. I'd brought printouts of everything I could find about Millbrook, which wasn't much. But there was one thing I'd noticed. Every 28 years, there was a spike in missing persons reports in Millbrook, 1968. 3 people vanished on Halloween. Night 96, 2 people. Disappeared 2024, we were here. 28 years. A pattern. And if the pattern held, the house had appeared in 1940, 1912, 1884. And going back, who knew how far. I did some quick math. If the house appeared every 28 years, and people had been disappearing every time it appeared, how many people had the Blackwood house taken over the centuries? The answer made me feel sick, but I'd come this far. I'd invested time and money into this investigation. My viewers were counting on me. And more than that, I needed to know the truth. That's the curse of curiosity. Once it takes hold, you can't shake it. October 31st dawned grey and cold. The fog that had rolled in the day before had thickened overnight, turning Millbrook into something from a Gothic novel. We spent the morning doing last-minute equipment checks and going over our plan. The rules were simple. We'd enter the house at midnight, document everything we could, and get out by 3 a.m. at the latest. We'd stick together no matter what, and if anyone felt unsafe or wanted to leave, we'd all leave together. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Famous last words, Marcus joked, but nobody laughed. By evening, the town had become a ghost town. The few people we saw on the streets hurried past without making eye contact. Stores closed early. Houses went dark. It was like the entire population of Millbrook was hiding, waiting for Halloween night to pass. We returned to Thornhill Lane at 11 p.m. Jake had set up external cameras to capture the house's appearance, if it appeared. We had equipment bags full of EMF meters, digital recorders, infrared cameras, and enough battery packs to run everything for hours. The empty lot sat waiting. Overgrown and ordinary. Maybe it won't appear, Marcus said hopefully. Maybe the legend is just a legend. But Elena shook her head. It's coming. I can feel it building. It's like reality is getting thinner here. She was right. I could feel it too, a strange vertigo, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff. The air felt charged, electric. The fog swirled around us in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. And then at 11:47 p.m. it began. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Our breath came out in clouds. The EMF meters went crazy, needles pinned to the maximum, and the air itself seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, except it was the middle of a cold October night. "Holy shit," Jake whispered, his camera trained on the empty lot. "Are you seeing this?" We were all seeing it. The empty lot was no longer empty. The house materialized slowly, like it was being painted into existence by an invisible hand. First just an outline, a ghost of architecture. Then walls solidified, windows appeared, a door took shape. The house was Victorian, 3 stories tall with a wraparound porch and a tower on one corner. It must have been beautiful once, but time or something worse had ravaged it. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and something about its angles seemed wrong. Like the house had been built by someone who understood geometry, but had decided to violate it anyway. And above the door, barely visible in the fog, was a number, 1430. "We're recording everything, right?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the house. "Every camera is rolling," Jake confirmed. This is impossible. This is actually impossible." But there it stood, solid and real and waiting. Elena was shaking. "It's not just a house," she said. "It's a doorway, and something on the other side is watching us." The front door opened. Not slowly, not with a horror movie creak. It just swung open, sudden and final, revealing darkness beyond. An invitation. Marcus grabbed my arm. Sarah, we don't have to do this. We can leave right now. We've got the footage of it appearing. That's enough. He was right. We'd already captured something impossible. We could leave, post the video, and be legends in the paranormal community. We'd be safe, but I couldn't shake the thought of all those missing people. All those families who'd never gotten answers. All those lives that had simply ended on Halloween night, swallowed by the Blackwood house. Maybe, just maybe, we could find out what happened to them. I'm going in, I said. But you don't have to follow me. Any of you. They looked at each other, then at me. Fuck it, Marcus said. I didn't drive all this way to wait in the car. Jake nodded. Same. Elena took a deep breath. The spirits want us to know the truth. We're meant to be here. I wasn't sure about meant to be, but I was grateful not to be going in alone. We crossed the property line, and the temperature dropped again. The house loomed above us, impossibly tall, impossibly wrong. Up close I could see the details. Intricate woodwork that formed patterns that hurt to look at directly. Windows that reflected nothing. A door handle shaped like a grasping hand. I reached for the door, and my hand was shaking. Last chance to turn back, I said. Nobody moved. I pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The Blackwood house swallowed us whole. The moment we stepped across the threshold, everything changed. The fog didn't follow us inside. The sounds of the night, wind, distant traffic, the rustling of leaves, cut off like someone had thrown a switch. The silence was absolute, oppressive, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your heart pound. And the smell. God, the smell. It wasn't decay exactly. It was older than that. It smelled like a museum that had been closed for a century, like dust and forgotten things and time itself. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a foyer that was both grand and grotesque. A staircase curved upward into shadows. Portrait paintings lined the walls, but the faces in them had been scratched out, leaving only torn canvas and exposed wood. A chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dark and coated in something that looked like cobwebs, but moved on its own, pulsing gently like it was breathing. EMF readings are off the charts, Jake whispered, checking his equipment. And the temperature. It's fluctuating wildly. 45 degrees, now 60, now 30. That's not physically possible. None of this is physically possible, Marcus said, his camera tracking across the room. The house shouldn't exist, but here we are. Elena had gone very still, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. There are so many of them, she whispered. So many voices. They're all trying to warn us. Warn us about what? I asked. She opened her eyes and they were filled with tears. It's too late. We're already inside. We're already part of it. Before I could ask what she meant, a sound echoed through the house. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. Then another set of footsteps, faster, running. Then more. Dozens of footsteps above us, around us, everywhere at once. But when we pointed our flashlights toward the sounds, there was nothing there. Just old house sounds, Marcus said, but his voice shook. Houses settle. Wood expands and contracts. This house is less than an hour old, I reminded him. It literally didn't exist until midnight. The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. A voice, distant and distorted, calling from somewhere deeper in the house. Help me, it was a child's voice. Elena grabbed my arm. Don't follow it. It's a trick. It's trying to separate us, but even as she said it, the voice came again, clearer now. Please help me. I'm scared. Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap. But what if it wasn't? What if there really was a child in here? Somehow trapped in this impossible house. Could I live with myself if I didn't at least try to help? We stay together, I said. No matter what we hear, no matter what we see, we don't split up. They nodded, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. The Blackwood house was already working on us, finding our weak points, exploiting our fears and our compassion. We moved deeper into the house, our flashlights creating pools of light in the endless darkness. The foyer led to a hallway lined with doors. Some were closed, but others stood open, revealing rooms that made no sense. I saw a Victorian parlor filled with furniture covered in white sheets. I saw a modern kitchen, stainless steel and granite, impossibly out of place. I saw a child's bedroom, toys scattered on the floor, a mobile spinning slowly above a crib even though there was no breeze. And in each room, I saw movement in the corner of my eye, shadows that darted away when I tried to look directly at them, shapes that might have been people, or might have been something else entirely. "The house is showing us what we expect to see," Elena said. "It's reading our minds, pulling out our memories and fears. None of this is real. Or rather, it's only as real as we believe it to be." "That's not comforting," Jake muttered. We passed through a dining room where a table was set for a feast that had never been eaten. The food on the plates looked fresh, steam rising from covered dishes. But when Marcus leaned in closer for a better camera angle, he recoiled. "There's something moving in the food," he said. And I saw he was right. The roast beef writhed with maggots. The mashed potatoes seethed with something black and oily. The wine in the glasses had separated into layers of dark red, and something else, something that looked almost like blood. The child's voice came again, from upstairs now. "Please, I don't want to be alone anymore." We found the stairs at the end of the hallway. They spiraled upward, the steps creaking under our weight. The walls here were covered in wallpaper that seemed to depict a forest scene. But as we climbed, the trees in the pattern seemed to move, reaching toward us with branch-like fingers. The second floor was different from the first. Where the ground floor had been Victorian and grand, the second floor felt more modern but wrong. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a sickly green glow. The doors here were metal, like in a hospital or institution. And behind those doors I could hear sounds, crying, screaming, laughter that went on too long. "We need to leave," Marcus said. "Sarah, seriously, we need to get out of here right now." He was right. Every instinct I had told me we were in danger. But we'd come this far, and I needed to see what was at the heart of this house. I needed to understand. "Just a little further," I said. "We'll check the third floor, then we'll leave. I promise." I was lying, and I think they knew it. But they followed me anyway, because that's what friends do. They follow you into the dark, even when they know it's a mistake. The stairs to the third floor were narrower, older. These were the original stairs, I realized. Whatever modern affectations the house had taken on, this was its true heart. The wood was black with age, worn smooth by countless feet. The air grew colder with each step, and our breath came out in thick clouds. At the top of the stairs was a single door. It was different from all the others we'd seen, simple, wooden, with an old-fashioned lock. And carved into the wood, barely visible in our flashlight beams, were symbols. Not letters, not pictures, but something older. Something that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. "Don't open it," Elena said. She was pale, shaking. "Please, Sarah, whatever's behind that door, we're not ready for it." But I was already reaching for the handle. The door swung open before I could touch it. Beyond was a room that shouldn't exist. It was larger than the entire house, stretching away into darkness that our lights couldn't penetrate. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, everything was covered in those same symbols we'd seen on the door. Thousands of them, maybe millions, carved and painted and scrawled in what looked like blood, and other things I didn't want to identify. And in the center of the room, something was waiting. I say something because I can't call it a person. It had the shape of a person, the outline of a human figure, but it was made of shadow and smoke and angles that geometry wouldn't allow. Where its face should have been was a void, an absence so complete that looking at it made my stomach turn. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, from inside my own head. "Welcome home," Elena screamed. Marcus grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back, but I couldn't move. The thing in the center of the room had my full attention, and I understood with a clarity that was almost peaceful that I had been expected. That I had always been expected. Every 28 years, the thing said, the door opens. The house returns. And the debt must be paid out to what debt? I managed to ask. The debt of existence, the price of being. This town made a bargain long ago in a time before memory. They wanted prosperity, safety, life without suffering. And so a deal was struck. One night every 28 years I returned to collect. "You're taking people," I said. "You're making them disappear." The void that was its face seemed to study me. "I am giving them purpose. I am making them part of something eternal. You think death is the end? You think your small lives matter in the vastness of time? I'm offering salvation." "You're offering horror," I said. The thing laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass and screaming children, and the last breath before drowning. Horror and salvation are the same thing. You just need to change your perspective. Behind me, Jake was documenting everything, his camera trained on the entity. Marcus was pulling Elena back toward the stairs, but she was resisting. her eyes locked on the symbols covering the walls. "I know what these are," she said softly. "I can read them. They're names. All the people who've been taken. They're written into the house itself." I looked closer and saw she was right. Among the symbols, carved in letters almost too small to see, were names. Hundreds of names, thousands, going back centuries. Emily Blackwood, 1756. Thomas Ashford, 1784. Sarah Millbrook, 1812. Wait. I stepped closer. My flashlight trained on that last name. Sarah Millbrook. But that couldn't be right. That was my name. My actual name. Sarah Chan had been my married name, but my maiden name, the name I was born with, was Millbrook. The entity's laughter filled the room. "Did you think your arrival here was chance? Did you think your curiosity was your own? You carry the blood of this town, Sarah Millbrook. Your ancestors made the bargain, and now you're here to fulfill it." My mind reeled. This was impossible. I'd grown up in California. My parents had moved there from I realized I didn't know. I'd never asked. And when I thought about my family history, there was a blank space, a hole in my memory that I'd never noticed before. "No," I said, "I'm not part of this. I'm not from here." "Your great-great-grandfather was Samuel Millbrook," the entity said. "He was one of the founders of this town, one of the men who summoned me. And his bloodline has always been tied to mine. You were always going to come here. You were always going to open that door. What happens next will blow your mind. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me if you'd have the courage to face something like this. Would you enter a house that only exists on Halloween? Let me know below." Marcus finally got Elena moving, and they were halfway down the stairs. Jake was backing toward the door, camera still rolling, but I couldn't move. The entity's words had rooted me to the spot. "Your friends can leave," it said. "I don't need them. I only need you. Stay here, accept your role, and they can walk away. Or try to run and I'll take all of you. Choose." It was an impossible choice, but even as I stood there, frozen with fear and revelation, a small part of my brain, the journalist part, the part that never stopped analyzing, noticed something. The entity was bargaining. It was offering me a deal which meant it was bound by rules. It couldn't just take what it wanted. There were limitations, conditions. The house appeared once every 28 years because that was the agreement. The people who entered had to choose to stay in some way. The bargain had to be maintained. And if there were rules, there might be loopholes. What if I refuse? I asked, what if all of us leave right now? The entity's form rippled, like a reflection in disturbed water. Then the debt goes unpaid, and the house will remain, not just for one night, but forever. It will spread. It will consume. First this town, then others. The door will stay open until the bargain is fulfilled. You're lying, I said, putting together the pieces. You need permission. You need us to accept the curse willingly, or it doesn't work. That's why you're trying to manipulate me with this ancestor story. That's why you're offering my friends freedom. You need me to choose to stay. The silence that followed was electric. The entity's form flickered, and for just a moment, I saw something beneath the shadow, something old and vast and utterly alien, trapped inside this house, bound by agreements made centuries ago. Clever, it said finally. You have your great-great-grandfather's mind. He too saw the cracks in the deal, but he was not clever enough to avoid the trap. And neither are you. The room suddenly shifted. The walls began to close in, not physically but dimensionally. The space was folding in on itself, and I realized with horror that even if we ran, we might not be able to find the door. The house was reconfiguring itself, becoming a maze, a prison. Jake. Marcus, Elena! I shouted. Get out now. Don't wait for me. But even as I said it, I saw that the stairway was gone. Where the door had been was just another wall covered in symbols and names. We were trapped. The entity drifted closer, its void face inches from mine. You're going to be part of something magnificent, it whispered. You're going to transcend your flesh, your fear, your small human concerns. You're going to become eternal. I'd rather die, I said. Death is also part of the deal. But first, let me show you what you're refusing. The room fell away and I was somewhere else, somewhere impossible. I was standing in a vast library, shelves stretching infinitely in all directions. But instead of books, the shelves held moments, crystallized instances of time, glowing softly in the darkness. I could see fragments of lives, a child's first steps, a wedding kiss, a final breath. The entity had been collecting human experiences, storing them like specimens. "This is what I offer," it said. "Immortality. Your memories, your essence preserved forever. Every person who enters the house becomes part of the collection. They never truly die. They exist eternal and unchanging in perfect moments. That's not life," I said. "That's imprisonment. It's both. And neither. It's transformation." I thought about all those names carved into the walls, all those people who'd entered the Blackwood house over the centuries, thinking they could explore it, understand it, escape it. But the house had consumed them, broken them down into moments and memories and stored them away like books on a shelf, and it wanted to do the same to me. But I noticed something. In this vast library of stolen moments there were gaps, spaces where experiences should be but weren't. The entity's collection was incomplete. "You're feeding on us," I said, understanding dawning. "You're feeding on our experiences, our emotions. But you can't create your own. You're trapped here just like everyone else. This isn't power. This is starvation." The entity's form convulsed. "I am ancient. I am eternal. I am dying," I interrupted. "The bargain is killing you. Every 28 years you get just enough to survive, but never enough to thrive. You're as much a prisoner of the Blackwood house as anyone who's entered it." The library began to dissolve, and I found myself back in the symbol-covered room. My friends were there, pressed against the walls, frozen in place. The entity loomed over all of us now, its form expanding to fill the entire space. "You think you can bargain with me?" it said, and its voice was rage and desperation. "You think you understand what I am? I think you're trapped," I said. "I think the people who summoned you made a cage as much as a deal. And I think we can end this." "By doing what?" Pierce demanded. "Destroying the house?" "I am the house. We are one. If I die, everyone I've collected dies with me. Centuries of souls gone in an instant. Could you live with that, Sarah Millbrook? Could you murder thousands to save yourself?" It had me. If what it said was true, destroying the entity meant destroying every person it had ever taken. I'd be trading one life, mine, for thousands of deaths. "Unless, show me," I said. "Show me the people you've collected." "Let me see them," the entity hesitated. In that hesitation I saw doubt. And where there's doubt, there's weakness. "Let me see them," I repeated, "or I'll know you're lying." The room shifted again, and this time I saw them. The collected souls. But they weren't preserved in perfect moments. They were screaming. Every single one of them was trapped in their moment of greatest fear, reliving it over and over, for decades or centuries. The entity hadn't been preserving them. It had been torturing them. "You lied," I said quietly. "This isn't salvation. This is hell." The entity's form collapsed in on itself, and when it spoke again, the voice was different, smaller, almost human. "I didn't lie. This is salvation. From the perspective of eternity, what is suffering? What is fear? They are sensations. Proof of existence. Better to feel terror forever than to feel nothing at all." I understood then. The entity was insane. Whether it had always been this way, or whether centuries of imprisonment had broken it, I didn't know. But it genuinely believed that eternal torment was preferable to death. "We're getting out of here," I said, turning to my friends. They were still frozen, but I could see their eyes tracking me, aware but unable to move. All of us. "And we're ending this." "You cannot end what is eternal," the entity said. "Watch me." I started moving toward where the door had been, feeling along the wall for any seam, any crack that might indicate an exit. Behind me, the entity's form began to expand again, filling the room with shadow. "If you leave, I will follow," it said. "The house will remain. The curse will spread. You think you're saving your friends? You're dooming the world." "Then I guess we'll have to make sure the house doesn't remain," I said, and that's when Elena spoke. Her voice was strained, like she was fighting against invisible bonds. But she managed to get the words out. "Fire, the symbols. Need to burn them." The entity screamed, a sound so terrible that I fell to my knees, hands over my ears. But Elena was right. The symbols covering the walls were the source of the entity's power, the anchors that held it in our reality. If we destroyed the symbols, we might be able to break the curse, but that would mean burning the house down. "With us inside it, Jake," I shouted over the entity's screaming. "Do you have the lighter? The emergency lighter?" He managed a nod, his hand slowly, painfully reaching into his pocket. The entity's shadow wrapped around him, trying to stop him, but Marcus suddenly broke free from whatever was holding him. He lunged forward, grabbing the lighter from Jake's hand, and spun toward the wall. "This is for everyone you've taken," he shouted and flicked the lighter. The flame caught on the old wallpaper immediately. The symbols began to burn, and as they did, the entity's screaming intensified. The room shook. Cracks appeared in the walls, in the floor, in reality itself. "You're killing them," the entity shrieked. "You're killing everyone I've collected. Their blood is on your hands." But as the fire spread, something else happened. From the burning symbols, shapes began to emerge. Translucent, ghostly, but unmistakably human. The souls the entity had collected weren't being destroyed by the fire. They were being freed. I saw Emily Blackwood, the first name I'd seen on the wall, step through the flames. She looked at me, smiled, and mouthed the words "thank you" before fading away. Then Thomas Ashford, then Sarah Millbrook, my ancestor, and hundreds more. A river of souls flowing out of the burning house, finally released from their torment. The entity collapsed, its form shrinking, becoming almost human-sized. "No," it whispered. "No, without them, I'm nothing. I'm alone. It faded, becoming transparent, and for just a moment before it disappeared entirely, I saw what it really was. Not a demon, not an ancient evil, but something that had once been human. A person who'd made a terrible bargain, who'd tried to escape death by feeding on others, and who'd become the monster they'd feared becoming. The fire was spreading fast now, consuming the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The house was coming down around us. "Move!" Marcus shouted, and suddenly we could all move again. The entity's hold on us had broken completely. We ran, down the stairs, through rooms that were collapsing and changing and folding in on themselves. The house was dying, and it was taking reality with it. I saw hallways that led into darkness, rooms that contained other rooms that contained themselves in an infinite loop, doors that opened onto starscapes and void. The front door appeared ahead of us, and we burst through it, tumbling out onto the overgrown lot of 1430 Thornhill Lane. Behind us, the Blackwood house burned, but it burned wrong. The flames were black, and they consumed the structure in seconds, not minutes. As we watched, gasping and coughing, the entire house folded in on itself like a dying star, collapsing down to a single point of darkness, and then nothing. The lot was empty again, as if the house had never existed. We lay on the ground, staring up at the sky. The fog had lifted. The stars were out. It was 3:17 a.m. on November 1st. "Did that really happen?" Jake asked softly. I looked at my hands. They were covered in soot. My clothes smelled like smoke. Marcus's camera had footage. "We had evidence." "Yeah," I said. "It really happened." Elena was crying, but she was smiling too. "They're free," she said. "I can feel it. All those souls. They're finally free." We stayed there for a long time, none of us quite ready to move, to accept that we'd survived. Eventually, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had seen the fire, or at least the strange lights. We needed to leave before we had to explain what had happened. We drove back to the inn in silence. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the lobby, still dressed, like she hadn't slept. When she saw us, her hand went to her mouth. "You went in," she said. "You went into the Blackwood house and you came out." "It's gone," I told her. "The house is gone. The curse is broken." She stared at me for a long moment, then burst into tears. "My sister," she said through her sobs. "I lost my sister to that house in 1996. I've been waiting 28 years for it to come back. I thought maybe I could see her again." "But you're saying she's free." "She's free," Elena said gently. "They're all free." We left Millbrook the next morning. As we drove away, I saw something I hadn't seen the day before. Halloween decorations. Not on every house, but on some. A few jack-o'-lanterns, a ghost hanging from a tree. Like the town was finally allowing itself to celebrate Halloween again, now that the curse was lifted. We didn't talk much on the drive back to Brooklyn. What do you say after experiencing something like that? How do you process a night where you witnessed the impossible? Freed hundreds of tortured souls and nearly died in a house that shouldn't exist. Marcus drove. Eleanor slept in the back seat, exhausted from the psychic toll of the investigation. Jake was obsessively going through the footage on his laptop, making sure everything had recorded properly. And I stared out the window, watching normal America scroll by. Gas stations, fast food restaurants, suburban houses with kids, playing in the yards, and wondered how all this normalcy could exist in the same world as the Blackwood house. We got back to my apartment around 7 p.m. on November 1st. I lived in a converted loft in Bushwick, the kind of place that was trendy 5 years ago and was now just expensive. My cat, Schrödinger, was extremely annoyed at my absence and made sure I knew it. "We should watch the footage," Jake said, setting up his laptop on my coffee table. "We need to see what we actually captured." Part of me didn't want to. Part of me wanted to pretend the whole thing had been a shared hallucination, stress-induced psychosis, anything but real. But I was a paranormal investigator. Documentation was the point. If we'd really captured evidence of the supernatural, real, undeniable evidence, it would change everything. Jake pulled up the first file, the external camera footage from when the house appeared. For the first hour of footage, there was nothing but an empty lot, barely visible in the darkness and fog. Then at 11:47 p.m., exactly as we'd witnessed, the air began to shimmer. But on camera, the effect was even more dramatic. The space where the house would appear started to ripple like water, and through those ripples I could see something else. Another place. It was only visible for a few frames, but Jake paused it and zoomed in. "What is that?" Marcus asked. It looked like a landscape, but wrong. The geometry was off. The colors were too vivid or too dark. And in the distance were structures that might have been buildings but seemed to be made of liquid or shadow or light. It was like looking at a photograph of a place that existed in more than 3 dimensions. "That's where the house comes from," Elena said quietly. She'd woken up and was standing behind us, looking over our shoulders. "That's the space between spaces. The entity was trapped there until the bargain opened a door. The house materialized on camera, exactly as it had appeared to us." The quality of the footage was surprisingly good. Jake had invested in top-tier night vision equipment, and it had paid off. Every detail was visible. The peeling paint, the wrong angles, the number above the door. "Okay, that's incredible," Jake said. "But now let's look at the interior footage." He pulled up the files from our body cameras. We'd each been wearing one, though in the chaos of the investigation I'd forgotten all about mine. The footage from inside the house was disturbing in ways I hadn't expected. On camera, the house looked even more impossible than it had in person. The hallways stretched away at angles that couldn't exist. The rooms contained spaces that were larger than the building's exterior dimensions allowed. And in every frame, in the shadows at the edge of the light, there were figures. "Pause it," Marcus said. "Right there." "Do you see that?" Jake paused the footage. In the background, just barely visible in the darkness of one of the rooms we'd passed, was a person. They were standing perfectly still, watching us. Their face was pale, their eyes dark hollows, and their mouth was open in a silent scream. "That's Sarah Millbrook," Eleanor whispered. "Your ancestor." She was trying to warn us. Jake scrubbed through the footage and we found more figures, dozens of them. In every room, in every shadow, the collected souls had been there watching us, trapped in their torment, but aware enough to know that we were their only chance at freedom. The footage from the 3rd floor was the most disturbing. When we'd entered that symbol-covered room and encountered the entity, the camera had captured something we hadn't been able to see with our eyes. Behind the shadowy form, in the darkness of that impossible space, were threads. Thousands of them, maybe millions, stretching away into nothing. And each thread was connected to a ghostly figure, the souls the entity had collected, tied to it like puppets on strings. "It really was feeding on them," I said. "Literally draining their essence." The footage of us burning the symbols was almost beautiful in a terrible way. As the flames spread, the threads began to snap one by one and the figures dissolved into light. You could see them ascending or dispersing or moving to whatever came next. Freedom in whatever form that took. And the entity's final moments were captured too. As it shrank and faded just before it disappeared, the camera caught something our eyes had missed. Beneath the shadow and smoke, there was a face. Human, male, middle-aged, and absolutely terrified. "That was the man who made the original bargain," Eleanor said with certainty. "The person who summoned the entity, and then became part of it. He'd been trapped for centuries, feeding on others to survive until he forgot he'd ever been human." We watched the footage until 3 a.m., going through every file, every angle, every moment. By the end, we had incontrovertible evidence of the supernatural. We had footage of a house materializing from another dimension, of impossible spaces and ghostly figures, of an entity that violated every law of physics and biology. We could be famous. We could change the world. We can't release this, Marcus said. I looked at him in shock. What? This is everything we've been looking for. This is proof. Exactly, he said. It's proof. Real proof. And what do you think happens when we release it? Best case scenario, we become celebrities for a few weeks before someone debunks it as CGI. Worst case, people believe us, and they start looking for other places like the Blackwood House, other entities, other bargains. He's right, Elena said reluctantly. There are things in the dark corners of the world that are meant to stay in the dark. The Blackwood House was one of them. We freed the souls that were trapped. We ended the curse, but if we tell the world about it, we might inspire others to go looking for similar power. We might create more monsters, I wanted to argue. I'd risked my life for this footage. We all had. But as I looked at the paused frame on the screen, the entity's human face twisted with centuries of madness, I knew they were right. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share. So what do we do? Jake asked. Just pretend it didn't happen. We tell a version of the truth, I said, an idea forming. We create a narrative version of the events, change some details, make it clear it's a story. People can believe it or not, but we don't release the raw footage. We don't provide proof. We let it be legend, and that's what we're doing now. The story I'm telling you is true, every word of it. But I'm not going to show you the footage that proves it. You'll have to decide for yourself whether to believe me. The days after we returned from Millbrook were strange. I kept expecting something to happen. Nightmares, paranormal activity, some sign that our experience in the Blackwood House had followed us home. But there was nothing. Life returned to normal with almost insulting speed. I went to the grocery store. I paid my bills. I fed my cat. It was like the universe was going out of its way to be mundane, as if to balance out the horror we'd experienced. But then, 3 days after we got back, I received a message on my YouTube channel. From Millbrook Mike 1987, the user who'd originally told me about the Blackwood House. You did it, the message read. You really did it. Thank you. I tried to respond, but the account had been deleted. The original comment telling me about the house was gone too. Scrubbed from my video as if it had never existed. I did some digging and found something interesting. In 1987, a man named Michael Patterson had disappeared in Millbrook on Halloween night. He was 23 years old, studying architecture at Boston University, and had come home for the weekend. He told his sister, a young woman who would grow up to run the Millbrook Inn, that he was going to investigate the abandoned lot on Thornhill Lane, where a house supposedly appeared every Halloween. He never came back. Millbrook Mike 1987, Michael Patterson, 1987. He'd been trapped in the Blackwood House for 37 years, existing as a digital ghost in the aftermath of his death, waiting for someone to come along who could free him. And when we burned the symbols and released the souls, he'd been freed too. I told the others what I'd found, and we agreed. Some mysteries should stay mysterious. We'd done what we set out to do. We'd investigated the Blackwood House, we'd documented it, and we'd ended its curse. That was enough, but of course it wasn't over. It's never over. 2 weeks after Millbrook, Elena came to me with a problem. I'm seeing things, she said. We were having coffee at our usual spot, and she looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, her hands shaking slightly as she held her cup. Ever since the house, I'm seeing things that I shouldn't be able to see. It's like burning those symbols opened something in me. I can see the structure underneath reality now. The cracks, the thin places where other things can get through. Is that bad? I asked. I don't know yet, she admitted. But Sarah, there are a lot of cracks. The Blackwood House wasn't unique. There are dozens of places like it, maybe hundreds. Places where the barrier between our world and other places is thin. And some of them have things waiting on the other side. I'd been afraid of this. I'd hoped that the Blackwood House was an isolated incident, a single curse that we'd managed to break. But if Elena was right, if there were more places like it, then our work wasn't done. Show me, I said. She pulled out her phone and showed me a map she'd been working on. Red pins marked locations all across the United States where she'd sensed these thin places. Most were in older parts of the country, New England, the Deep South, the Pacific Northwest, but there were clusters in unexpected places too. A suburb in Ohio, a small town in Kansas, a desert community in Nevada. These are all potential Blackwood houses? I asked. Not exactly, Elena said. Some of them might just be places with residual energy. But some of them feel active. Like there's something on the other side waiting for a door to open. I looked at the map, at all those red pins, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. We'd stumbled into the Blackwood house by accident, driven by curiosity and a desire for viral success. But now we knew the truth. We knew these places existed. We knew the danger they represented. Could we really just walk away? We need to investigate them, I said. Not all of them, not right away. But we need to at least check out the ones that feel most active. If there are entities like the one in Millbrook, if there are souls trapped and suffering, we have a responsibility to help them. Elena nodded slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. But Sarah, this is dangerous. The Blackwood house almost killed us, and we got lucky. If we start actively investigating these places, eventually our luck is going to run out. Then we'll be careful, I said. We'll prepare better. We'll learn from our mistakes, but we can't ignore this. Marcus, when I told him the plan, was less enthusiastic. You want to do what? He asked. You want to turn this into a regular thing? Hunting haunted houses and supernatural entities? Sarah, we're not Ghostbusters. We're not equipped for this. Then we'll get equipped, I said. We'll research. We'll train. We'll bring in experts. Experts in what? Burning down cursed houses. If necessary, yes. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. You've changed, he said. Since Millbrook, you're different. It's like you found your purpose or something. He was right. I had changed. The Blackwood house had shown me that there was real evil in the world, real suffering that needed to be addressed. But it had also shown me that ordinary people like us, could make a difference. We'd freed hundreds of souls from eternal torment. We'd ended a curse that had plagued a town for centuries. If we could do that once, we could do it again. I need to do this, I told Marcus. I need to know that we're helping. But I understand if you don't want to be part of it. This has to be a choice, not an obligation. He sighed, rubbed his face, and finally nodded. Okay, I'm in. But we do this smart. We don't rush into situations unprepared. And the moment it gets too dangerous, we're out. Deal? Deal, I agreed. Jake was the easiest to convince. Are you kidding? This is exactly the content we need. We'll be the first real paranormal investigation team. Not ghost hunters looking for orbs and cold spots, but people who actually confront supernatural entities and free trapped souls. This is the dream. So that was it. The team was assembled. We had a mission, and we had a map full of locations to investigate. But before we could start our new venture, I received a package in the mail. No return address, postmarked from Millbrook, Massachusetts. Inside was an old leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. The first page had a note written in elegant script. To the woman who freed us, this journal belonged to Samuel Millbrook, your ancestor. He documented the truth about the bargain and the curse. He tried to find a way to break it, but he ran out of time. Perhaps his knowledge will help you with what comes next. The Millbrook Historical Society. I'd never heard of a Millbrook Historical Society, and when I tried to look it up, I found no record of it. But the journal was real, and its contents were illuminating. Samuel Millbrook had been a scholar and a collector of occult knowledge. In 1752, he and a group of other men had founded Millbrook with a specific purpose: to study the thin places, the locations where other realities intersected with ours. They hadn't intended to summon anything. They'd been trying to understand the nature of reality itself, but their experiments had torn a hole in the fabric of space, and something had come through. Something that had once been human, but had transcended humanity in the worst possible way. A man named Ezekiel Blackwood, who'd lived in the 1600s and had made his own bargain with forces beyond human comprehension. Ezekiel had become the entity we'd encountered in the house, and the original founders of Millbrook, including Samuel, had made a deal to contain him. They'd built the house as a prison, but the house could only exist one night every 28 years. The rest of the time, Ezekiel and his prison existed in that other place, that space between spaces. The bargain required a sacrifice every 28 years to maintain the prison. But Samuel had discovered something important. The bargain could be broken if someone from the bloodline of the founders entered the house willingly, confronted the entity, and destroyed the symbols that bound it to our reality. He'd spent the rest of his life trying to find a way to do exactly that, but he died before he could make the attempt. And his descendants had either forgotten the truth or had been too afraid to act on it, until me. "You were meant to go to that house," Elena said, when I showed her the journal. "Your ancestor set this in motion over 200 years ago. He made sure the knowledge would be passed down, that eventually someone from his bloodline would be in a position to break the curse. It was a dizzying thought. My entire life, everything I'd done, had been leading to that moment in the Blackwood house. My career as a journalist, my pivot to paranormal investigation, even the YouTube comment that had led me to Millbrook, it had all been orchestrated across centuries, or maybe that was giving too much credit to fate and not enough to coincidence and human choice. I'd chosen to investigate. I'd chosen to enter the house. I'd chosen to burn the symbols, but either way the result was the same. The curse was broken, and now I had knowledge that no one else had. How to identify these thin places, how to confront the entities that waited beyond them, and most importantly, how to free the souls they'd trapped. The journal's final entry, written by Samuel just before his death, read, "To whomever reads this, I have failed in my task, but I trust that my descendants will succeed where I could not. Know that the world is stranger and more terrible than most people imagine. Know that there are forces beyond our comprehension, both malevolent and indifferent. But know also that humanity has power, the power of will, of sacrifice, of love. These forces fear us because we have something they can never possess, the ability to choose. Use that power wisely. Use it well, and may you have the courage I lacked." The second location on Elena's map was a town called Ashford Hollow in western Pennsylvania. Population 1,200. The kind of place that's slowly dying as young people move away and industries shut down. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. Except that, according to Elena's research, 17 people had disappeared from Ashford Hollow over the past 60 years. Always on the same date, February 14th, Valentine's Day. "It's following a pattern," she'd explained as we drove there in late January. "The Blackwood house appeared on Halloween, Samhain, the Celtic festival, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. If there's another thin place in Ashford Hollow, it makes sense that it would activate on another liminal date. Valentine's Day is Lupercalia, an ancient Roman festival, a time of transition and transformation." "You're saying we're hunting a Valentine's Day monster?" Jake asked from the back seat. "I'm saying we're investigating an anomaly that happens to occur on Valentine's Day," Elena corrected. "The date is just when the barrier weakens enough for something to cross over. We'd come better prepared this time. We had equipment to measure dimensional fluctuations, symbols of protection from multiple spiritual traditions, and a plan for what to do if we encountered another entity. We also had Samuel Millbrook's journal, which contained detailed instructions for identifying and dispelling various types of supernatural threats. More importantly, we had experience. We knew what we were up against, or so we thought. Ashford Hollow looked even more depressed than Millbrook. Where Millbrook had been quaint and historic, Ashford Hollow was just sad. Boarded-up storefronts lined Main Street. The few people we saw moved with the defeated shuffle of individuals who'd given up on life improving. Even the snow looked dingy. We checked into the town's only motel, a place that looked like it had been decorated in 1987 and never updated. The desk clerk, a woman in her 70s, barely looked up from her crossword puzzle when we registered. "You here for the anniversary?" she asked in a flat voice. "Anniversary?" I said carefully. "Valentine's Day. Every year we get a few people coming to remember. The disappearances." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather. "You family of someone?" "No," I said. "We're researchers, looking into the pattern of disappearances." She finally looked up, her watery eyes focusing on me. "Pattern," she repeated. "That's a nice word for it. Makes it sound scientific, like there's an explanation. Do you think there's an explanation?" Marcus asked. She laughed, a bitter sound. "I think this town is cursed. I think whatever took my daughter 15 years ago is still out there waiting. And I think you're fools to go looking for it." Despite her warning, or maybe because of it, we started investigating immediately. The town library was housed in an old Carnegie building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1920s. The librarian, A young man with thick glasses and a cardigan that had seen better days was surprisingly helpful once we explained we were researching local history. "The disappearances," he said, keeping his voice low even though we were the only people in the library. "Yeah, I've looked into those. It's weird, right? Always on Valentine's Day. Always exactly 17 people over 60 years. Never more, never less." And wait, I said, "Exactly 17. That seems specific." He nodded enthusiastically, clearly excited to have someone interested in his research. "Right? I tried to find a pattern in who gets taken, but there isn't one. Different ages, different backgrounds, different parts of town. The only commonality is the date. Have there been any investigations?" Jake asked. "Police, FBI? Sure, especially in the early years. But they never found anything. No bodies, no witnesses, no evidence. People just vanish. They go to bed on February 13th, and when the sun rises on February 15th, they're gone. Sometimes they're alone when it happens. Sometimes they're sleeping next to their spouse who remembers nothing. It's like reality just erases them." Marcus was filming all of this, making sure we had documentation. Elena was quiet, her eyes closed, probably sensing the spiritual energy of the place. "Is there any particular location the disappearances are centered around?" I asked. The librarian's enthusiasm dimmed. "That's the thing. They're not. They happen all over town. It's like the whole town is the thin place, not just one spot. That was different from the Blackwood house, which had been localized to a single property. If the entire town of Ashford Hollow was a thin place, if the barrier here was weak everywhere, then we were dealing with something much larger than we'd anticipated." We spent the next week interviewing people who'd lost loved ones. What we found was heartbreaking. These weren't just statistics. They were families torn apart, lives destroyed by inexplicable loss. Mary Henderson, who'd lost her husband 30 years ago. We'd been married 5 years. We went to bed on the 13th, and when I woke up on the 15th, he was gone. His pillow was still warm, but he was just gone. Tom Wu, who'd lost his sister 15 years ago. She was 19, studying pre-med. The night before she disappeared, she called me, said she felt like something was watching her. I told her she was being paranoid. I'll never forgive myself for that. The pattern that emerged from these interviews was disturbing. In the days before the disappearances, victims reported feeling watched, followed. They had nightmares of being in love, of being consumed by love, of love that turned into something predatory and suffocating. And on Valentine's Day itself, right before they vanished, several witnesses reported hearing them speak in languages they didn't know, saying words that hurt to hear. "It's not taking them randomly," Elena concluded after we'd compiled all the information. "It's choosing them, marking them somehow in the days before Valentine's Day, and then when the barrier is thinnest, it pulls them through." "But why 17? I asked. "What's significant about that number?" Eleanor pulled out Samuel Millbrook's journal and flipped through it until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry. Samuel documented various numerical patterns in supernatural phenomena. 17 is significant in several mystical traditions. In Roman numerals, it's 17. Rearrange those letters and you get Vixie, I have lived, past tense. It's associated with death and endings. So this thing, whatever it is, it's taking exactly 17 people as some kind of tribute or sacrifice," Marcus said. "That's sick." "It's worse than that," I said, a terrible realization forming. "If it's been taking 17 people every year for 60 years, that's over 1,000 victims. And if this pattern goes back further, the librarian had mentioned that records before 1965 were incomplete. But what if the disappearances had been happening longer? What if Ashford Hollow had been feeding this entity for centuries? We needed to find the source. If the whole town was a thin place, there had to be a center point, a location where the barrier was thinnest. That's where we'd find our answers. Elena spent that night in meditation, trying to sense the spiritual geography of Ashford Hollow. When she emerged at dawn on February 10th, she looked exhausted but determined. "The old church," she said, "St. Valentine's Church on the hill. That's the center." Of course, it was a church named St. Valentine. The universe had a dark sense of humor. St. Valentine's Church had been abandoned for decades. The building was stone Gothic revival style, with a tower that loomed over the town like a warning. According to the historical records, it had been built in 1823 by the town's founders and had served as the community's spiritual center, until 1965, when it had been abruptly closed by the diocese. No explanation was ever given publicly, but the librarian had found an internal memo that mentioned unseemly practices and spiritual contamination. We approached the church on February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. The building looked even more ominous up close, its windows dark, its door chained shut. But chains wouldn't stop us. We'd come prepared with bolt cutters. The interior of the church was a disaster. Pews were overturned, the altar was destroyed, and graffiti covered the walls. But underneath the graffiti, I could see older markings, symbols similar to what we'd found in the Blackwood house, but different. These weren't binding symbols. These were invitation symbols. They didn't contain the entity here, Elena said, horror in her voice. They invited it. They opened a door and welcomed it in. Why would they do that? Jake asked. I was reading the symbols, using Samuel Millbrook's journal as a reference. The more I translated, the sicker I felt. They were desperate, I said. The town was failing. Disease, crop failures, economic collapse. So the founders made a bargain. They offered the entity a gift, 17 souls every year in exchange for prosperity. And it worked, Marcus said grimly. For a while. Until 1965, when the church was closed. I bet that's when people started realizing what they'd done, but it was too late by then. The bargain had been made, and the entity expected its payment. Even after the church closed, even after the town tried to forget, the disappearances continued, because the door had been opened, and it couldn't be closed by simply walking away. We set up our equipment throughout the church, preparing for whatever would happen at midnight. Based on what we'd learned from the Blackwood house, we knew we needed to destroy the invitation symbols to break the connection. But we also knew this entity would fight back. We have 4 hours, I said, checking my watch. It was 8 p.m. on February 13th. Let's use them wisely. We spent those hours reinforcing our protections, studying the symbols, and preparing fire accelerants that would burn hot enough to destroy stone. We also set up cameras at every angle. If we were going to confront another entity, we wanted documentation. At 11:30 p.m., the temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly, from 40 degrees to below freezing. Our breath came out in clouds. Frost formed on the walls. It's starting, Elena whispered. At 11:45 p.m. we heard them, voices outside the church, speaking in unison. When we looked out the windows, we saw them. 17 people, walking toward the church like sleepwalkers. They were this year's chosen victims, marked by the entity and now being called to their doom. We have to stop them, Marcus said, moving toward the door. Wait, Elena grabbed his arm. If we interfere with the summoning directly, we might be marked too. We need to break the symbols first, cut the entity off from this reality. But we were running out of time. The 17 people were almost at the door, and at 11:50 p.m., the church began to change. The walls became transparent, showing that same other space we'd glimpsed when the Blackwood house appeared. But this time the effect was worse. The entire church was transitioning, becoming a bridge between our reality and something else, and through that transparency, we could see it. The entity that had been feeding on Ashford Hollow for centuries. It was beautiful and terrible. It looked like a sculpture made of light and shadow, with the general shape of a human figure, but wrong in every detail. Too many limbs, too many eyes, movements that defied physics, and surrounding it were the souls it had collected, over 1,000 of them, trapped in an orbit around the entity like planets around a sun. It's not like the entity in Millbrook, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. This one isn't trapped. It's not bound. It's free and it's been feeding for centuries. It's grown powerful. The 17 marked people entered the church. They moved in perfect synchronization, their faces blank, their eyes reflecting that other space. They began to arrange themselves in a circle around the destroyed altar, their lips moving in words we couldn't hear. Now or never, I said, and ignited the first accelerant. The symbols on the walls began to burn. The entity screamed, a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that made my ears bleed and my vision blur. The church shook. Cracks appeared in the walls, the floor, reality itself. But the 17 people didn't stop. They continued their ritual, their voices rising to match the entity's screaming. And I realized with horror that they weren't being controlled anymore. They were participating willingly. The entity had shown them something in their dreams, promised them something and they'd chosen to accept. They want to become part of it, Elena said. They think it's transcendence. They think it's eternal love. The entity was more sophisticated than the one in Millbrook. It wasn't just feeding on fear and suffering. It was offering something in return, a promise of eternal connection, of never being alone, of love that would last forever. And some people, desperate and lonely and broken by life, were accepting that offer. But I'd seen what that eternal love really meant. I'd seen the souls trapped in orbit around the entity, consumed by it, losing themselves in its embrace. This wasn't love. This was predation, more symbols burned. The entity's form began to flicker, losing coherence. But it was fighting back. The 17 people suddenly turned to face us, and when they spoke, it was with the entity's voice. "You cannot stop what has been freely given," they said in unison. "These souls are mine by choice, by contract, by love. It's not love if you manipulated them into it." I shouted back. The entity laughed through 17 mouths. "And what is human love but manipulation? You dress it up in poetry and romance, but it's always about possession, about consuming another person. I simply offer truth. I consume them literally, and they become part of something greater than their small, lonely lives." Jake was still burning symbols, working his way around the church. Marcus was documenting everything, his camera trained on the entity, and Elena was doing something with her hands, tracing patterns in the air, muttering words in a language I didn't recognize. "Keep it talking," she whispered to me. "I'm trying something," so I kept the entity engaged. "The people you've taken didn't choose this. You marked them, invaded their dreams, showed them what you wanted them to see. I showed them possibility," it said. "I showed them that they could matter, that their brief, meaningless lives could be part of something eternal. Is that so terrible?" "Yes," I said simply. "Because you're lying to them. You're not offering transcendence. You're offering extinction. Every person you've consumed has been erased, broken down to fuel your existence. That's not love. That's parasitism." The entity's form rippled with anger. "You speak of things you don't understand. You who have never been truly alone. You who have never stared into the void of existence and felt the cold indifference of the universe. I offer warmth. I offer connection. I offer meaning. You offer yourself," I said. "That's all you've ever offered. You're not saving these people from loneliness. You're exploiting their loneliness to feed yourself." More symbols burned. The church was transforming back, the transparency fading, our reality reasserting itself. The entity was losing its grip, but the 17 people were still in their circle, still chanting, still offering themselves willingly. And I didn't know how to save someone who didn't want to be saved. Elena's hands moved faster, her voice rising. She was performing some kind of ritual, something I didn't understand. But I could feel its effect, a warmth spreading through the church, pushing back the entity's cold presence. "I'm severing the contract," she said through gritted teeth, "showing them the truth. But they have to choose to see it." The entity screamed again, its form fragmenting, and suddenly the 17 people stopped chanting. They looked around confused, like they'd just woken from a dream. Some of them started crying. Others fell to their knees. What was I doing?" one of them asked, a middle-aged man with tears streaming down his face. I wanted to... "You were manipulated," I told him gently. "But it's over now. You're free." The entity made one last attempt, reaching out with shadow tendrils toward the 17 people. But Elena's ritual held, protecting them, and Jake had burned the last of the invitation symbols. The entity's connection to our reality was severed. "This isn't over," it said, its voice fading. "There are other places, other doors. You cannot close them all." "Watch us," I said. The entity dissolved, pulled back into that other space. The church snapped fully back into our reality, solid and real and blessedly mundane. The 17 people were safe, traumatized but alive. And in the aftermath, as we helped them out of the church and called the authorities, I thought about what the entity had said. It was right. There were other places. Elena's map had dozens of locations marked, and if we'd found 2 entities actively preying on humans, there were probably more we didn't know about. But we'd also found something else, a way to fight back. We'd learned that these entities, powerful as they were bound by rules. They needed permission, contracts, invitations, and contracts could be broken. What you're about to hear next will change everything you thought you knew about the world. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me what you think is out there, and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end. Over the next months, we investigated more locations on Elena's map. We found a house in Maine where people disappeared into mirrors. We found a forest in Oregon where time moved differently and people aged decades overnight. We found a subway station in Chicago that led to places that didn't exist. And in each location, we found the same thing: entities that had been feeding on humans for decades or centuries, and people who needed help. We couldn't save everyone. Some people had been consumed too long ago, their souls too fragmented to restore. Some entities were too powerful to confront directly, and sometimes people chose to stay with the entities, believing the promises of transcendence and eternal connection. But we saved who we could. We freed souls that had been trapped. We broke contracts and closed doors, and slowly we built a network of people who'd experienced these thin places and survived, people who wanted to help others. My YouTube channel evolved. Instead of investigating ghosts and posting spooky videos, I started documenting our work in narrative form, telling stories that were true but presented as fiction. The audience grew. Some people thought we were just good storytellers. Others suspected we were documenting real events. And a few, the ones who'd experienced their own encounters with the impossible, reached out to help or be helped. Marcus eventually left the team. After we closed the door in Ashford Hollow, he sat me down and said, "I can't do this anymore. I've seen too much. I know too much. I just want to go back to a normal life where houses stay in one dimension and love doesn't literally consume you." I understood. This work wasn't for everyone, and honestly, I worried about him. Once you've seen behind the curtain, once you know that reality is thinner and stranger than most people imagine, how do you go back to normal life? But he managed it. Last I heard, he was teaching film production at a community college in New Jersey, married with a kid on the way. He never watches my videos. I think it's too painful, too much a reminder of what he knows is out there. Jake and Elena stayed with me. Jake because he's convinced we're doing the most important work in the world, documenting and fighting threats that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. Elena because she believes it's her calling, her purpose. The entities we've encountered have given her powers she never had before. The ability to see across dimensions, to manipulate spiritual energy, to sense when and where the barriers between worlds are weakening. I think that's what the entities fear most, she told me once. Not that we'll destroy them, but that we'll become like them. That we'll evolve, transcend, become something that can challenge them on their own level. It's a disturbing thought. I don't want to become like the entities we fight. But I can't deny that each encounter changes us, gives us knowledge and abilities we didn't have before. Maybe that's the real story here. Not the haunted houses or the supernatural entities, but the evolution of the people who confront them. We are not the same people who entered the Blackwood house on Halloween night. We've been transformed by what we've seen and what we've done, and I think that's okay. Because the world needs people who can stand in the gap between normal reality and the impossible things that lurk at its edges. The world needs people who will confront the entities, break the contracts, and free the souls. Even if it costs us our innocence, our peace, maybe even our humanity. Samuel Millbrook's journal has one final entry that I haven't shared until now. It's dated just before his death, and it reads, "To my descendants who will face what I could not, know that the thin places have always existed and always will. They are not aberrations but features of reality, places where the walls between worlds grow thin. Some are dangerous, harboring entities that would prey upon humanity, but others are doorways to wonder, to transformation, to possibilities beyond our imagining. Your task is not to seal all the doors, that would be impossible and perhaps unwise. Your task is to be guardians, to protect the innocent from predatory forces, while remaining open to the genuine mysteries and miracles that exist beyond our ordinary perception. Walk carefully, question everything, trust your companions, and never forget, you are not fighting monsters. You are fighting the worst impulses of consciousness itself, the desire to consume, to dominate, to use others for your own ends. These entities were once human or something like human, before they chose predation over empathy. Do not become what you fight. That is the only rule that truly matters. I keep those words close, especially on the hard days, because this work is hard. It's exhausting and terrifying, and it takes pieces of your soul. But it's also important, maybe the most important work anyone could do. The Blackwood House only existed on Halloween. But there are houses and forests and subway stations and empty lots that exist every day in every town in every country. Places where reality is thin and the impossible bleeds through. We can't investigate them all. We can't save everyone, but we can try, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. So let me ask you one final time, do you believe? Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Have you felt that presence watching you from the dark? Have you walked past a place that felt wrong in ways you couldn't articulate? If you have, you're not alone. And you're not crazy. The thin places are real. The entities are real. But so is our power to stand against them. Leave a comment below and tell me your story. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever encountered something that defied explanation. And most importantly, tell me if you'd have the courage to walk into a house that only exists on Halloween. Hit that subscribe button, because our work isn't done. There are more stories to tell, more places to investigate, more souls to free. And I want you with me for every step of this journey. Stay safe out there. Keep your eyes open. Question the reality you've been taught to accept. And remember, when you stare into the darkness, sometimes the darkness stares back, but that's okay. Because now you know you're not defenseless. Now you know that ordinary people can confront the extraordinary. Now you know that curses can be broken, entities can be defeated, and trapped souls can be freed. The Blackwood House was just the beginning. There are dozens more investigations ahead of us, more entities to confront, more mysteries to solve, more people to save, and I need you with me. I need your stories, your experiences, your courage. Because this isn't just my channel anymore. This is a community. A network of people who've seen behind the veil and refuse to look away. So comment below, subscribe, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If a place feels haunted, it probably is. And if you think you've encountered one of these thin places, reach out. We're here. We're listening. And we're ready to help. The house that only exists on Halloween is gone, but the battle continues. And I promise you, what comes next will be even more incredible, even more terrifying, even more impossible to believe. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and never stop questioning the world around you, because the truth is out there. And together we're going to find it. This is Sarah Chen signing off. But not for long, never for long. The darkness is waiting. And so are we.